From the nation's capital, the Conservative Caucus presents Conservative Roundtable, an in-depth look at today's most important issues.
Welcome to Conservative Roundtable. I'm Howard Phillips, chairman of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors these broadcasts. We have a special guest for this broadcast, George Farrar, who's the executive director of an important organization called OpenDebates.org. Now, before I get into talking with our guest, who is leading an effort to promote fairness in the presidential debate process, let me confess my personal potential conflicts of interest here. I've run for president 3 times on the ticket of what is now called the Constitution Party. I've always been excluded from the debates by the Republican and Democratic Party nominees. One of the reasons is that they work together to exclude candidates who might be harmful to their own prospects. And they can do that because on the debate commission, you've had Frank Fahrenkopf, a former national chairman of the Republican Party who now runs the American Gambling Association, representing the Republicans, and Paul Kirk, who used to be, by the way, a next-door neighbor of my wife, who was Ted Kennedy's administrative assistant and has been a leader in the Democratic Party. So the jury is rigged in terms of deciding who gets on. In 1992, I was in a debate for the nomination of the Independent Voters Party in Massachusetts with 5 or 6 other people who sought that nomination. I won that debate and I won their nomination. In 1996, I was in a couple of debates, including one hosted by Larry King, but we didn't have either Bob Dole or Bill Clinton willing to join us. And then in the year 2000, I participated in a debate at the Reagan building, sponsored by Judicial Watch. But again, we didn't have the so-called big boys taking part with us. Now, if George Farrar is successful, that closed game, which excludes so many issues in which the American people are interested, may be opened up. George, I've taken some of your time, but hopefully I've saved some of it. Tell us about Open Debates, how it got started, what its relationship is with something called the Citizens Debate Commission.
Open Debates was started last fall, and it was started precisely because too many Americans were outraged that the presidential debates, the single most important event in the process of selecting a president, was defying the wishes of the American people. Candidates that the American people want to see, candidates like Ross Perot, Ralph Nader, Pat Buchanan, yourself, and others, were excluded. Issues the American people want to hear talked about, be it government waste, corporate crime, child poverty, you name it.
I saw you on C-SPAN last night, and last night is not last night before this is being broadcast, because this will be weeks after we've taped it. But I thought Pat Buchanan did a brilliant job of laying out some of the most important issues where Kerry and Bush are in total agreement, and unless you've got a third-party candidate in those debates, those issues where, in some cases, most Americans would agree with the non-Kerry, non-Bush position will be excluded from the public discourse.
Absolutely. Third-party candidates aren't just individuals pursuing victory. These are parties and candidates who are raising critical issues for public discourse that are eventually co-opted by the Republican and Democratic parties. Abolition of slavery. We hope. Abolition of slavery, women's suffrage, Social Security, minimum wage, 40-hour work week. One of the most critical, important pieces of legislation throughout the history of this country has been proposed by third-party candidates. When they raise these issues and attract support, these issues get co-opted by the major parties. But when you have exclusionary debates, not only are you excluding these articulate leaders of popular parties, you're excluding those central and critical issues that often a public majority of Americans support that the major parties don't support.
Buchanan pointed out that Kerry and Bush both support amnesty for illegal aliens.
Yes.
They both supported the invasion of Iraq.
Yes.
They both supported NAFTA and the World Trade Organization.
Yes.
They both supported the Patriot Act. They both supported No Child Left Behind. And I would argue that at least on some of those issues, they're in the minority.
I would have to agree with you, because the polls are reveal those exact points you just made. And Mr. Phillips, the reason why you will not hear those very third-party voices, those voices that might support the public majority, might reflect the public opinion on these issues in the critical debate process, is, as you mentioned in the introduction, the Republican and Democratic parties own and operate the presidential debate process. They don't just do it ideologically. It's not just because Frank Fahrenkopf and Paul Kirk are co-chairs of the Commission on Presidential Debates and happen to oppose third-party challengers and support the two-party system. Every 4 years, Mr. Phillips, they award control of the presidential debates to the Republican and Democratic nominees, who behind closed doors in Washington draft secret debate contracts called Memoranda of Understanding that dictate precisely who gets to participate, who gets to ask the questions, how high the podium will be, what issues will be discussed. They're in secret documents, and we have copies of the documents, and that is the root of the reason why we're pursuing debate reform. It's fundamentally unacceptable for the candidates to be negotiating behind closed doors to defy the wishes of the American people and then not be held accountable because no one in this country knows what's going on.
What is the Citizens Debate Commission?
Open Debates formed something called a Citizens Debate Commission last year. It was officially incorporated on January 12, 2004. And the Citizens Debate Commission consists of 17 national civic leaders from the left, center, and right of the political spectrum. On the conservative element, we have Paul Weyrich, founder of the Heritage Foundation, Alan Keyes, Babe Buchanan, Tom Fitton of Judicial Watch, Tony Perkins of the Family Research Council. And these individuals all have transcended their ideological differences with the liberal compatriots to pursue debate reform. And it's an organization that aspires ultimately to displace the Commission on Presidential Debates as national debate sponsor and host presidential debates this fall and for the future of the American political process that realize the wishes of the American people. And yesterday, not yesterday, but weeks ago yesterday, we proposed 5 presidential debate sites and 1 vice presidential debate sites in 6 colleges and universities in swing states around the country.
Can you run those by us?
The sites are Canisius College in Buffalo, New York, obviously a very politically inspired region of the country.
Maybe you'll get Tim Russer to show up in the audience.
We very much hope so. Swarthmore College in Swarthmore, Pennsylvania, a swing state. Nova Southeastern in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, which is also obviously a critical swing state. Capital University in Ohio, another critical swing state. Carleton in Minnesota, another swing state, and Willamette in Oregon, another swing state.
Actually, it's pronounced Willamette.
Willamette, thank you very much.
Right. Having been to Oregon in every presidential race, I learned that the hard way. Now, first of all, how does a candidate qualify to be in one of these regional debates? And would, in addition to the regional debates, there be a national debate?
Yes, these actually, the purpose of these debates is to attract the candidates that the American people want to see on that stage, and therefore they would be national. The television networks, NBC, ABC, CBS, Fox, would televise these debates if the major party candidates, or at least one of them, were to participate. I've spoken with the various producers of various shows, and they've expressed as such. To be on these debates, you have to meet what criteria called the Appleseed criteria. These are criteria that were developed by the Appleseed Task Force on Fair Debates.
And who are they?
It was a group of elected officials, civic leaders, and academics at the American University College of Law that got together in 1988, devised criteria that they deemed to be most effective at ensuring that the American people were able to see the candidates they want to see without drowning out the voices of the leading contenders for the presidency. And the criteria are as follows. A candidate can participate in the debates as long as he's on enough state ballots to win an electoral college majority and either reaches 5% in pre-debate polls or polls show that a majority of Americans want to see that candidate participate in the presidential debates.
If they've never heard the candidate's name, how can you assume that a majority would favor participation? Are you asking them, do they favor the idea of having everybody in the debates, or supporting particular people by name being in the debates?
What would happen is the Citizens Debate Commission would commission a poll, and that poll would list candidates in order of what ballots they are on. If you're on 50 state ballots, you're obviously going to be at the top of the list and on down, and ask the American people that they're polling, the sample, do you think so-and-so ought to be included in the presidential debates? If over 50% of the American people think so, that candidate will be included. There's no question, Mr. Phillips, this criteria are not the most lenient criteria possible. You could, of course, have ballot access criteria that let the handful of Americans nominated of political parties who are on enough sufficient state ballots and have overcome the most discriminatory ballot access laws in the world. But at the same time, we as a sponsor do not want to be complicit in allowing the American people not to hear from the leading candidates if they so desire.
Let me ask you one of the questions that was not raised at your news conference on C-SPAN. There were a number of debates among the various aspirants for the Democratic Party nomination, but one person was notably excluded, Lyndon LaRouche. I am not a Lyndon LaRouche fan, but your taxes and mine have gone to send him hundreds of thousands of dollars in federal matching funds. And on what basis was he excluded from those debates. Was that totally arbitrary? Was there a standard he failed to meet? What was it?
The primary debates are sponsored often by a number of different organizations, sometimes the party itself, sometimes a local chapter of the League of Women Voters, sometimes a local media outlet. And it's often up to this sponsor to decide who they want to invite to the presidential debates. I, too, don't particularly have a personal affinity for Lyndon LaRouche, but he was arbitrarily excluded. There was absolutely no justification, especially considering he received taxpayer funds, for him to be excluded from a stage in which Al Sharpton, Dennis Kucinich, and other candidates who weren't exactly polling at the top of the pack were also on the stage.
And Sharpton apparently is going to have to return some of his taxpayer
Yes, he will. Absolutely. In the Democratic primary debates, wasn't the best of television imaginable, but it clearly demonstrates that one can have multiple number of candidates on stage at the same time, answering sufficient questions, asking each other questions, attempting different formats. I don't see why the American people, when they're deciding who ought to fill the most important office in the world, can't have the same number of individuals before them for the presidency.
We'll be back with George Farah of OpenDebates.org right after these messages. Please stay with us. One of the top leaders in the Communist Chinese military declared that the United States is the main enemy of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the People's Republic of China, which is longhand for what we call China. We have been building up our enemy, if that is a reciprocal term, by giving them most favored nation status and membership in the World Trade Organization. Last year alone, that gave them an $84 billion advantage in money which is fungible. And as a result of the extra money they have, they're not only taking jobs from the United States, they're increasing their military budget by 17% a year. It's time to stop sending technology and dollars to Communist China.
The Conservative Caucus, www.conservativeusa.org or 703-938-9626.
Face the Truth is a production of the Conservative Caucus and is seen twice monthly on the station you are watching. We will be interviewing the movers and shakers of the pro-life movement. We hope to educate and even inspire you about what is being done in our country to protect and to promote the sanctity of life. Please watch us.
Don't miss Face the Truth with Stephen Peruka and Conservative Roundtable with Howard Phillips right here on this station every week.
Here's how you can become a citizen lobbyist and influence how your representatives vote. Write a letter to your congressmen and senators. Speak out on a call-in talk radio program. Write a letter to the editor of your local newspaper and call the Conservative Caucus for more information at 703-938-9626.
Help the Arbor Day Foundation plant more trees across the nation. Plant a tree today for all the world to share.
Go to arborday.org.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks a lot for all you guys have done.
Thank you. Thank you for everything. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I am the port in the storm.
I am the line in the sand.
Deploy boss group, start the track.
I am the enforcer of the sea.
The United States Coast Guard will see you and prepare your orders.
We are the defenders of the homeland. We are the shield of freedom. We are the United States Coast Guard.
Heed your country's call. Join the Coast Guard or Coast Guard Reserve.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips of the Conservative Caucus with our guest, George Farah, a year 2000 graduate of Princeton University, who is the founder and executive director of OpenDebates.org, and who has attracted a lot of serious talent to his effort to open up the public discourse in presidential years to issues which would otherwise escape the notice of the American people. George, I admire what you're doing, and I think you're doing a great job at doing it. But what in the world causes you to think that either Kerry or Bush would take the risks involved with having other people in these debates?
The candidates will only participate in our debates if they think it serves their political interests. There is absolutely no question. So this effort requires exerting tremendous pressure on the candidates so that the political cost of rejecting our debates trumps the political benefit. And this is entirely possible. Throughout the 1990s, any candidate that was seen dodging real presidential debates suffered in the polls. President Bush, number one, in 1992, when he tried to avoid some of the presidential debates, his poll numbers dropped. He looked at his watch during the presidential debates, and his polls dropped even further.
When will this be over?
When will this be over? And in his son, in 2000, tried to propose alternate debates on cable channels that would minimize audience size. As a result of that, his poll numbers dropped. So, Howard, I'm quite confident that we can make our debates the real presidential debates, and candidates who try to avoid our debates and instead try to participate in the sham debates that have been proposed by the bipartisan commission will suffer in the polls, and therefore they'll be compelled to realize the aspirations of the American people and participate in our forums.
Well, unless George Bush is 20 points behind in the polls, I think you have a better chance of getting Kerry to agree to this than Bush. But as you say, you'll get a lot more attention if one of these so-called major party candidates is on board. Tell me about your proposed vice presidential debate.
We have a single vice presidential debate proposed in Willamette. I hope I pronounced it correctly.
Willamette.
Willamette, man,
it's tough.
It's the fourth time. And these events, it will be a single moderator debate. And it will be a debate in which the candidates, for the first time in presidential debate history, will have the opportunity to question each other.
Just in the vice presidential race.
In the vice presidential, but we're also proposing the same two single moderator debates in the presidential debate. For our formats, the formats are absolutely critical.
Sure. Who'll pick the moderator, by the way?
The Citizens Debate Commission. The candidates will have the power to veto a biased or incompetent panelist or moderator, and that's only subject to limitations, of course. But we will select moderators that are aggressive, challenging. They'll make sure the candidates are forced to reveal their positions on various issues. The format is what Walter Cronkite, for these recent debates, called an unconscionable fraud. He said that the format of the recent debates are so bad that the candidates ought to be accused of sabotaging the electoral process. This is Walter Cronkite, the dean of American journalism. These candidates in the existing formats for the recent presidential debates hand-pick compliant moderators, which is why Jim Lehrer has asked every question since 1992 in every single presidential debate.
Except for the small party
right,
debates
except for the minor
Larry
party
King and
right,
Larry
exactly.
Klayman and others.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Minor parties, independent candidates are open to being questioned by a number of journalists throughout the region and country. The major party candidates abolish follow-up questions, so they can say whatever they want, however erroneous or misleading, and suffer no political price and not be challenged. These guys actually prohibit themselves from talking to each other. You're not watching a debate. The candidates aren't even allowed to speak to each other.
They're doing 90-second, 60-second, 30-second sound bites.
Exactly. Under the League of Women Voters, which hosted presidential debates from 76 until 84, the candidates had about 4.5 minutes to answer a question. Surrebuttals, counter-rebuttals, follow-up questions. Under the Commission on Presidential Debates, answers have been reduced to 90 seconds. So all you're hearing, all the American people are hearing, are rehashed sound bites that they can hear from 30-second political television commercials during the rest of the political process. That's not the intention of the debates. The debates are supposed to be the only time tens of millions of voters are able to watch substantive discussion between the candidates and serve as a sort of refreshing break from these 30-second television commercials.
Well, let's take a worst-case scenario, George. Let's say that Bush and Kerry turn you down. Wouldn't you consider the possibility of moving ahead anyway with the view that once you get started, one or the other of them might be shamed into joining you later?
It's an interesting strategy, and we will definitely consider it. Our goal, though, is not at the outset to say we will be content with a debate that only consists of minor independent party candidates. You know as well as I, from your own experience, that the only way to attract tens of millions of voters is by having at least one major party candidate on stage. And our aspirations we will not lower our expectation. We intend to displace the Commission on Presidential Debates, and therefore we will only host debates, as of now, if one of the major party candidates participate. That is not to say that we could definitely consider the strategy of establishing forums and going forward with those forums in the hopes of shaming a candidate.
Isn't a big part of this going to be the extent to which the major media is willing to join you in bringing pressure on the major party candidates to take part?
The networks actually tried to take over the presidential debates in 1991. They remembered the glory of the Kennedy-Nixon debates in 1960, in which Kennedy-Nixon actually had a discussion on stage, and one of the most memorable television events of the 20th century.
Nixon could have used a shave.
Nixon could have used a shave. And the networks made an effort, but they lost. They lost. The commission absolutely refused to budge, and eventually one of the network leaders, Roone Arledge, backed down and said, this is exhausting, we're not going to win.
Well, what about this? What about developing a public service spot, making the case, which you so articulately present, and calling upon Tim Russer to Meet the Press, and Bob Schieffer of Face the Nation, and Wolf Blitzer, and Joe Scarborough, and George Stephanopoulos, and all of the others, to run that public service spot every day or every week on their programs as a way of shaming the candidates into doing it and building public support for what you're advocating.
Howard, that's a brilliant concept, and it's certainly one we absolutely should consider. Yeah. There's no question that the leading figures in the media establishment think that debate reform is necessary. That's why they made an effort in 1991, and if we were, and I've received commitments from various network producers of various network shows, we were able to secure the participation of at least one major party candidate, they would broadcast our debates on television, live, in front of tens of millions of Americans. They know, these are network agencies that are committed to providing information to the American people during the most critical electoral process in the entire world. And they know that these debates are sham debates. They are part of the process. They understand that the producer has to have limited questions. They understand the candidates are selecting the questioners. They understand you can't answer a question on foreign policy in the Middle East in 30, 60, or 90 seconds at all. So they have just as much hostility to the existing debate reform process that we do.
We have to be quick. We've got about 30 seconds. John Anderson, who got 7% of the vote when he was on one-on-one against Ronald Reagan in 1980, was an articulate presenter at your news conference as well. Are there any other big-name people who will join you? Is Nader part of your operation?
It's clearly in Nader's self-interest to be supporting debate reform, as it is in the interest of other minor parties, be it the Green Party, Libertarian Party, Constitution Party. Yeah, we've got big-name people. Walter Cronkite supports our debate reform efforts. Eugene McCarthy, Senator Alan Keyes, Pat Buchanan, the list goes on and on. Paul Weyrich, the list
all
goes
of
on
those who have been excluded.
All of those have been excluded, but also some individuals who have participated in presidential debates in the past. Ironically, President Bush, the father of the existing president, said in 1999 that the presidential debates are not real debates. These are scripted appearances, and they must be changed to serve the American people. Well, Mr. President, we're trying to do just that.
Talk to your little boy. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back after these messages with George Farah.
Face the Truth is a production of the Conservative Caucus and is seen twice monthly on the station you are watching. We will be interviewing the movers and shakers of the pro-life movement. We hope to educate and even inspire you about what is being done in our country to protect and to promote the sanctity of life. Please watch us.
Don't miss Face the Truth with Stephen Peruka and Conservative Roundtable with Howard Phillips right here on this station every week.
The very first clause in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 1, immediately following the preamble, asserts that all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States consisting of a Senate and a House of Representatives. All legislative powers, that means you cannot give other entities the power to legislate, not the United Nations or the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund or the federal judiciary or regulatory agencies or federally funded private organizations. If you're going to stick to the Constitution, only the Congress can make policy, and the Conservative Caucus works to assure that Congress will more nearly conform to the Constitution.
The Conservative Caucus, www.conservativeusa.org, 703-938-9626.
More than the entire population of Cincinnati. More than all the men and women in the Marine Corps. More than 4 times the number of unemployed auto workers. Since 1980, over 500,000 Americans who make clothing and home fashions have lost their jobs because we don't realize the impact of buying imported goods. So if you think looking for the Made in the USA label doesn't matter,
next,
it matters.
200 years ago, Lewis and Clark set out to discover an all-water route to the Pacific. But what they really discovered in themselves and everyone they encountered are qualities we can still learn from today. As we commemorate the Lewis and Clark bicentennial, We invite you to walk with them at lewisandclark200.org and see what you discover, because their trail winds through us all.
It's such a great document.
It guarantees me so many liberties and freedoms.
It's looking out for me.
Not only have I learned a lot of speaking skills,
meeting these 50 other incredibly talented people,
you learn a lot about yourself.
You're able to grow in so many ways.
Learning about public speaking.
You also gain a tremendous amount of friendships.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips, Chairman of the Conservative Caucus. If you like the kinds of issues we discuss on Conservative Roundtable, check out our website, www.conservativeusa.org, or fax us your name and address at 703-281-4108, or write to us at 450 Maple Avenue East, Vienna, Virginia, 22180. Our guest has been George Farah, the Executive Director of OpenDebates.org. George has written an important book called No Debates. He is the pioneer to break open the presidential debate process. And if you want to know more about it, I hope you'll read George's book. I can't tell you that on this program, but if people want to get more information about your book, how can they contact you?
OpenDebates.org. Just visit our website, and there's plenty of information on the book, on the project, and how the presidential debates are manipulated by the Republican Democratic candidates at the expense of your listeners, viewers, and the rest of the American people.
George, what can our viewers do to encourage George Bush, John Kerry, the establishment media to pay attention to what you're doing and to support it?
The competition for the presidential debates has just begun. And on one side are two entrenched parties and a tremendous amount of financial resources, often business contributions as well. On our side, the American people. So the only resource we do have are the American people. They have to log into our website, express themselves, sign our petitions, make phone calls, create local open debates chapters, ideally read this text, and do whatever they can to spread the word, because when the American people create sufficient grassroots support and exert sufficient pressure on the candidates, they will be forced to participate in real presidential debates.
Well, don't forget the Constitution Party and Michael Peroutka. My assumption is he will qualify in your various criteria, along with Ralph Nader, to join Kerry and Bush. Thank you for joining us. George, thanks a lot for taking the time to be with us, and we hope to see you at the next edition of Conservative